Rekluse clutches. So where to begin? I was on the fence on whether I wanted to use one of these clutches or not. I'd never ridden with one. I'd never, even test rode a person's bike with one. Have a couple friends that use them and love them. Met at least one friend that had it in his bike, excellent rider, and hated it. So I was like, I don't know what I want to do here. Short story, I went ahead and decided to put one. It's the Rekluse CX, so I guess you could call it their top end one. Put it in this 2020 KTM 250 XCF. I put it in, love it. Love the way it works. Rode with it just one time on the trails. Just was happy as hell with it. Just makes it really easy, especially if you're a shorter person. Just frees up a little bit of that control with the bike where you don't have to be messing with the clutch as much on some of the slow speed stuff. So my 250 was designed around, I call it my stand bike. It's designed around this slower stuff where when I go to dab and I can't touch the ground, I tip over a lot. Probably about 100 times per ride. Not that much, but it sure feels like it. Thought, wow, love it. So let me put in my 500. This is a 2020 KTM EXE 500F. It's the same clutch, the Rekluse CX. Put it in, hate it. So now I'm the same person that loves the Rekluse clutch and hates it, all in the span of a week. So what I've learned over the last 7 days, the big difference between the bikes, obvious. Engine size. What does that mean? Well, the 500, the power comes in extremely low, good torque, don't need a lot of RPM. I love to ride a bike at least 1 gear tall. If it's got decent power, I'll usually ride it 2 gears tall. So I'm kind of a lugger. 250, not as much torque. It's a more horsepower, more RPM based engine. Here we go, talking like an idiot again. The Rekluse clutch, I think it's called the EXP, the pack. When it engages, it's pretty simple design. It's based off of rotational mass. As RPM goes up, the disc expands and thus engages your clutch. So with the 250, you're going to ride in a higher RPM anyway because there's really no power down low. First gear, obvious, you can go down low. But most of the other gears, you're going to be in a little bit higher RPM than you ever would in a big bore. And if you're like me and you love the low RPM, even though you're in the low RPM in a 250, if you're still trying to stay in the power of the motor, the low RPM is still probably going to put you at least 3,000 RPM to 4,000, which you can easily be in the engagement zone of the clutch. On the 500, you can be below that and outside. So let me give you an example. Riding around in 6th gear on the street, doing maybe 40 miles an hour, a little bit less. No reason to downshift. The bike will pull easily from 35 up in 6th. No problem whatsoever. You let off the gas. Not a big deal. You go to get on the gas again, and the clutch is not 100% locked up. You get this slight slip as it engages as the RPM increases. So the way I'd explain it is if you have a manual transmission car and you're driving down the freeway, say, doing 65 miles an hour, and you need to kind of get out of the gas for a second, it's kind of like pushing in the clutch, and then when you go to get on the gas again, you let the clutch back out. Well, just think about that. Every time you let off the gas and you push the clutch in, you got to let it back out. And that's kind of what this does. So within the EXP design, there's 6 springs. They're color-coded and they're based off of the strength of the spring. The softer the spring might even have something to do with height. I haven't finished my investigation yet. But you can go low, medium, or high on the engagement on the RPM. So this one I've changed to the low end. Fixed the problem quite a bit, but I still hate it. So what I'm going to do is, since I hate it on the 500, the 250 probably does something similar to it. I just don't notice as much because I'm in the upper RPMs. So I'm going to change the 250 to the low RPM engagement so it kicks in a lot sooner. And then I'm going to still the 250 softer springs which are the heavier springs in the 250, but they're actually softer if you put them in the 500, which I'm going to do. So I'm going to swap out and go 3 soft springs, or the soft hard springs from the 250, and mix them in with the 3 soft springs for the 500. And I'm hoping that gives me the engagement at about another 500 RPM or so earlier. What it will create is maybe a quick engagement off idle, so you won't get that nice pull away. It'll probably want to, like, I don't want to say like dumping the clutch, but it'll probably be a little bit snappier. I'm fine with that. Not a big deal, but I'm going to go ahead and test it. So once I swap them out, I'll probably do another video to show you the EXP thing, and I'll probably do one at the very end. But anyway, I'm one of those customers that both love the Rekluse and hate it, and I can understand why. There's a mixed batch of people out there. It really depends on the displacement and your riding style. I'd say if you tend to be an upper RPM rider all the time and you're never really lugging the motor in a taller gear, you're probably never going to notice a difference between the manual clutch and the Rekluse, because it only really engages or disengages when you're in the lower RPM. So under torque it'll engage, but it's when you kind of back off the throttle for a second. What I did, like I said, what I hated on the 500 and hate is when you're in a taller gear and you just start putting around town or even on the trails, you go to roll on the gas again, instead of having that one-to-one lockup of the clutch, you can just feel it slipping a little bit and then re-engage. It's not much, don't get me wrong. Most people probably wouldn't even notice it. Drives me crazy. So I'm going to see if I can resolve it. Stay tuned. This is the EXP clutch pack out of the 250. Looks exactly the same as the one that's in the 500. You've got 3 of these pin screws with 3 springs on one side, 1, 2, and 3. You flip it over, you've got the same thing on the other side, opposite. So this would be, let me get my finger in the right place here, right there. That's the opposite side, opposite side. Yeah, to undo them, you guys can read the instructions, but you just push it down to compress the spring and then rotate it 9 degrees and it pops out. So on the other side are 3 of the silver springs, and then on this side are 3 of the red springs. The silver spring is the softer setting of it. It's actually a slightly, you can tell the diameter and just the strength of the spring, you can tell it's just slightly weaker than the red. So inside the 500, which I've already disassembled, it's actually pretty quick to do on these things, it has either the gold spring, which is, I know that middle one looks silver, but it's gold. Those are the heavy pull ones, so that means higher RPM before it engages. It uses 3 medium setting is 3 gold and 3 blue. I have all 6 blue in, which is supposed to be low RPM engagement. So I'm going to pull 3 of the blue ones out, and I'm going to compare them against the red ones. And if the red ones out of the 250, which is the harder spring for the 250, is actually softer and easier than the blue spring, then I'll put 3 red ones in it. If it's not, then I'll test it against the silver spring, and if the silver spring is softer, then I'll leave the 250 clutch as is with 3 silver and 3 red, and then put 3 silver and 3 blue in the 500. That should be clear as mud. So anyway, I'll post you guys, or I can do an update once I get things swapped around, once I figure out what's going on. Stay tuned. Update. So this is the 500 EXP clutch pack. It had 6 blue springs, which gives it the lowest RPM engagement. I pulled the 3 stiff hard springs out of the 250, and it turns out the red springs, which are the hard springs for the 250, are lighter than the light springs that are in the 500. So I've modified the 500 clutch pack to have 3 blue and 3 red, which means that these weights right here, they, as the clutch pack rotates, as the RPM increases, they're flung to the outside, and as they fling to the outside, if you look right here, it pushes out and then separates. So these springs, they hold the pack together, and so when these weights come out, they actually have to compress the springs. So the softer the spring, the quicker these weights slide out, the faster the clutch goes into full engagement. So what I'll end up with is a full lock condition, meaning if you'd release the clutch lever all the way, it will happen quicker at a lower RPM. I'm gonna have to do a little bit of testing just to make sure that something isn't wonky with the snapping the throttle. I would hope it disengages super quick, which would be the same thing as kind of like dumping the clutch, which is what I'm after. So I'll do some testing. If it improves it, but it's still not good enough, meaning it's not engaging as quick as I'd like it to, which is just pretty much right off idle. So when I'm in a taller gear, I don't have to downshift to keep the engine RPM up to make sure the clutch engages rather quickly when I get on the gas again. Because this every time, like I said, in 5th or 6th gear, just going around town, you let off the gas a little bit, you get on the gas, you just get this momentary slip where it's not fully engaged, it's just not locked. And you think about that, you let off the gas 100 times, there's 100 times it slipped, and there's just no reason for it. So what I'll end up doing is, if this makes it better but still not good, I'll put 3 more red springs in the 500 clutch pack, which will give a total of 6 red springs, and that'll make it pretty quick. I'm thinking that'll solve the problem. I only need it to freewheel at idle, really down low. I don't need it to do that much slipping for what I'm looking for out of this. I'll do an update once I get these things back installed and do a quick test ride. Stay tuned. Okay, I got the clutches back together. Just need to put the clutch cover on. Just want to show you guys a few things. This is the spring washer. And this is what puts actual compression on your clutch pack when you release your clutch lever. It's what makes everything create enough friction to not have the clutch slip. There's 3 settings on this ring. Changing the settings on this ring does not change the free play on the initial clutch for the Rekluse. It does change the amount of pressure that's generated when the clutch engages, because the tighter this spring is, when the Rekluse clutch does its engagement or expands, it's pushing against a much stiffer object, so you will get a slightly quicker engagement. That's just my opinion. Got nothing to back it up other than simple physics. But this is the EXP clutch pack. I'm gonna try and get in there with my finger, but you can kind of see that gap moving right there. That's the free play gap that you guys set with the Allen 3mm Allen screw on the slave cylinder down below on the other side of the motor. So when you turn that screw in, it pushes the rod, which pushes this, it's kind of like a throwout bearing that pushes the clutch pack away, and that gives you your gap, because this back metal here, that doesn't bend, so that gap always stays the same no matter how stiff the clutch spring is, this spring washer. So going to a stiffer settings, just going to probably make the engagement a little bit quicker, a little bit harsher, and definitely make the pull on the lever a lot stiffer. What you would use that for is if the discs are starting to get worn, you can go to a stiffer setting on that ring. Both of these bikes, factory setting is the middle setting for stiffness. 250 I stayed with it. The 500 I tried the softer setting initially. I've gone back to the middle setting. So, but I'll go over to the 500 so you can quickly see that it's the exact same stuff. And then you have that focuses. You can see the trying to get that to focus if you can grab it. I don't know if it's going to, but you can see the movement. It's a little bit blurry, but it has the same type of free play on it. So once I get these back together, I'll do one closure video on everything and let you guys know what I found out. Update you guys in a few more minutes. A quick couple comments on the slave cylinder down here for the clutch. Inside the center, there's the adjustment. 4mm Allen is what's used to adjust it. You can play a little bit with this as far as having it slightly in more, so the clutch is released a little bit more at idle or when the clutch isn't engaged, and that'll give it a slightly higher RPM engagement. I'm talking, like super fine adjustment, really fine adjustment. Then the other thing you can do is if you turn it out to where there's just a little bit of drag on the clutch pack, you can kind of feel it to where the bike wants to roll forward, but it's not rolling forward. Then it'll gauge just ever so slightly quicker when you get on the gas. So if you could use this for a fine adjustment, but if you are not liking the way the clutch is operating, turning this adjuster here probably isn't going to make you happy. You're probably looking at changing out the spring colors to get it to work correctly. So I'll do a follow-up on the final tuning of the 500. Okay, I just got back from a test ride on the 500 and the 250, just around the community here, private property gated community, so I can get away with it, other than the 250 being a little bit noisy. Not a big deal, didn't ride that long. So, update. 250 had the red springs 3 and silver springs 3, which was the medium setting. I went to the lowest RPM engagement, which is all silver springs. Right once you crack the throttle, the clutch engages, and it's not really a slip engage. It's kind of like I guess I'd call it like a professional level clutcher, someone that can engage the motor rather quickly and not have to slip it a lot. So really nice. Definitely stays locked up when deacceleration, so there's going to be quite a bit of more engine braking. It's not going to freewheel as easily. So very happy with that. Update on the 500. So stock, it had 3 gold and 3 blue, which was the middle setting. Didn't like it. I decided, well, what the hell, let's try and go 6 gold. That really sucked. Hated it. So I went ahead and went down to all 6 blue, which is the quickest engagement, lowest RPM. Not bad for first gear, but for the 500, the torque power it has down low, RPMs were like way too high for that type of engagement. It's like someone being lazy with the engagement. You just can really know it on a big bore. Okay, I'm going to cut into the video I was just doing there. I've got an update, and you guys don't need to hear all the stuff that I said on the in the video I just cut short. So I went ahead and pulled everything apart. Took about 8 minutes to do, complete from start to finish, and did the full 6 springs in red. So now they have the 250 hard setting, high RPM setting in the 500, and it's below the blue setting for the low RPM. Just got done with a test ride. Works excellent. As soon as you go off idle, the throttle, and the clutch engages just like it would before, but instead of as you accelerate through the RPM to, like, say, leave a traffic light, stop sign, or even in the dirt, instead of it like slipping until you get up to like 6 miles an hour, it engages in a very short duration, so you almost have like full lever out, just like a high quality advanced rider would do with a normal clutch anyway. Of course, there's still some slippage. Update. I went ahead and put 3 silver with 3 red springs in the 500 EXP clutch, and it's almost perfect. The thing, if you're like in 3rd gear or 2nd gear and you're coming up to a stop sign or a traffic light, just about the time that you would naturally want to pull in the clutch is about the exact time the clutch disengages. So I've got good engine braking. It engages fairly quickly in first, so if you get on the gas, not aggressively but decently, it'll easily pull the front end, just like if you were doing a really good clutch release. 2nd gear, it'll still pull the front end. You can feel a little bit of slip, which I'd expect. For trail riding, since it's a 500, you don't have to give it that much RPM, so when you just give it a little bit partial throttle right off the bottom, say maybe an 1/8 or so, the 1st gear will slip, and it'll make it nice for the slower speed stuff. I'd say you could easily get away with 2nd gear on the slow speed stuff in the trails as well. But anyway, this is going to be a short video showing the clutch in the 500. It has the 3 red and 3 silver springs in it. I'll do a 1st gear takeaway, a 2nd gear takeaway, then I'll do a quick 1st gear throttle blip just to see how it engages and brings the front end up, and I'll do the 2nd gear, and then I'll also put the front tire up against these rocks here, bricks or whatever the hell they are, and show you how the clutch will slip to allow you to control climbing up. So anyway, here I go.
This is a first gear throttle takeoff, no clutch, so clutch hand, not doing anything. It's in first gear now, no creep. I'll just do a slow takeaway in first gear. And that was the first gear takeaway. Now it's in second gear, no clutch. I'll do the takeaway again. Now this is the first gear with the throttle kind of aggressively blipped. So you'll see it engage in the front end pop up. Right there. Yep. Now do the second gear, same thing. See, it pops up, slips. Now go against the rocks, bricks, and do a climb of them just so you can kind of see how the clutch engages. So I got the front tire up, kind of up against the rocks. That's it, climbed up. Don't want to spin the rocks. Yeah, I already did a little bit, have to fix that. So now what I'm going to do is go into first gear, second gear, third gear, and then I'll slow down so you guys can see the engine braking, and I'll tell you verbally when it disengages. So first gear takeaway. Now I'm in second. Now I'm in third. Let off engine braking, engine braking. It just released right there. So here's first gear. Engine braking, just released. Right around 6 miles an hour. So anyway, that should give you a pretty good clue on how it's operating. So now I'm on the 250. I'll do the same stuff. First gear roll away, second gear roll away, first gear blip, second gear blip, and then probably like a second gear de-accel so you can hopefully sense the engine braking. So we'll start. Okay, in first gear, no clutch. This is just the first gear takeaway. Second gear now. This is the second gear takeaway. You can hear the engine braking. It just released. So I'm just going to do a first gear blip since I'm in the community and this is louder exhaust. But this is a first gear takeaway, a little bit aggressive so you can kind of see. They get spun the rear tire. I'm going to do a second gear coast so you can hear the engine braking. Engine braking, released right there. Almost at about 3 miles an hour, 4 miles an hour. Yeah, rear tire spun on the first gear takeaway. But, see, there's a blip. It just popped it up and then, of course, stalled it because it's cold. if I plant my foot a little bit, sit back, I can lift the front end no problem, just in first gear with a quick blip. See? So it engages pretty good. So that, guys, gives you a good indication what's going on with that.
I think I resolved the clutch for the 500 now. 3 red, 3 silver, which is just slightly stiffer than what I have in the 250 and considerably lighter than what came with the options for the stock tuning kit. So if you guys got a big bore and you got the Rekluse CX or the EXP portion, you might consider going down to at least 6 red springs, or combination of 3 red, 3 silver. You could probably go 6 silver if you wanted, but I think the engagement would be rather quick. It still might be good. I don't know. It'd feel almost like a solid normal clutch. But anyway, quick update. Definitely happy now. So far, loving that once I retuned it. Have a good one, guys. If you got any questions or comments, drop in the comment section.